A stone tablet holds a story no living person can read. Scattered across our world are messages from vanished minds, carved in scripts that have outlasted empires, but guard their meanings with absolute silence. This is a journey through 35 of history's most baffling written puzzles, ancient inscriptions that have defied every attempt to crack them. By the end, you will understand not just the artifacts, but the profound human quest to hear the voices of the past. We will encounter a botanical book from another dimension of thought, and a wooden ledger that could rewrite the story of the Americas. What does it feel like to stare directly into a mystery that has endured for centuries? The first of our 35 enigmas is not carved in stone but bound in vellum, a book that feels like it fell from another world. Discovered in 1912 by a Polish book dealer named Wilfred Voynich, this manuscript is a universe of confusion. Its pages are filled with delicate, impossible plants that no botanist has ever identified, alongside celestial charts of unfamiliar constellations and strange diagrams of tiny, nude women bathing in interconnected tubes of green liquid. But the true heart of the mystery is its text. Flowing across the pages in a beautiful, cursive script is an alphabet entirely unknown, a language of perhaps 20 to 30 distinct characters arranged in words that follow internal patterns, yet mean absolutely nothing to anyone alive. The best cryptographers of the Second World War, minds that broke enemy codes, turned their skills to this book and walked away baffled. Today, even artificial intelligence, which can find patterns invisible to the human eye, has failed to produce a coherent translation. The theories are as wild as the illustrations themselves. Could it be a meticulously constructed medieval hoax designed to fool a wealthy patron? Perhaps it is a genuine treatise on herbal medicine, written in a lost language, or a personal cipher so complex it died with its author. Or, as some of the more speculative suggest, does it represent a completely different framework of knowledge, a parallel dimension of thought committed to parchment? The Voynich Manuscript does not just resist translation, it mocks the very idea that every human thought can be understood. While the Voynich Manuscript is a book of bewildering illustrations, our second mystery is a single, tangible object you could hold in your hands. Unearthed on the Greek island of Crete in 1908, the Phaistos disc is a small, fired clay disc, roughly the size of a modern dinner plate. Its surface is covered on both sides with a mesmerizing spiral of stamped symbols, 241 in total, pressed into the clay while it was still soft. These are not letters in an alphabet, but tiny pictographs, a miniature menagerie of human heads, birds, plants, shields, and tools, each one a clean, repeating stamp. The immediate and maddening question is, what does this spiral say? The symbols are arranged in groups separated by lines, suggesting words or phrases, but the language they encode is utterly lost. The disc exists in perfect isolation. Nothing like it has ever been found on Crete or anywhere else in the world. It is a linguistic island with no known relatives, no bilingual text to act as a key. This isolation has bred a garden of theories. Some scholars, noting stylistic similarities, suggest it might be an import from ancient Anatolia, a prayer or a hymn to a forgotten goddess. Others, looking at the spiral's path, have wondered if it is not a text at all, but the rulebook for a sacred ritual or even an ancient board game, its symbols representing moves on a spiritual playing field. The profound silence of the Phaistos disc lies in its uniqueness. It is a message that was never meant to be repeated, a single statement fired into eternity, waiting for someone, anyone, to understand the rules of its game. But what happens when an entire civilization speaks to us, yet we cannot hear a single word? From the banks of the mighty Indus River, a third and far more expansive mystery emerges. Flourishing over 4,000 years ago, the Harappan civilization was a marvel of the Bronze Age. boasting planned cities with sophisticated drainage, standardized weights, and trade networks stretching from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. They were clearly a people of profound organization and communication, and they left behind their voice etched into thousands of small stone seals, tablets, and fragments of pottery. This is the Indus Valley script, a system of over 400 distinct signs, from elegant human figures and complex geometric shapes to the graceful outlines of animals. The most famous of these creatures is a serene, single-horned beast scholars call the unicorn, which appears again and again alongside the cryptic characters. The script has all the hallmarks of a written language, with clear directionality and signs that combine in repeatable sequences, yet here lies the devastating catch. Unlike the epic poems of Mesopotamia or the monumental decrees of Egypt, Harappan inscriptions are almost painfully brief. The average text contains only 4 or 5 signs, with the longest known examples stretching to just 26. Imagine trying to decipher English if you only had thousands of random phrases like "cat the" or "blue run quickly." You could recognize patterns, but you could never grasp grammar, never reconstruct a story or a law. This brevity has fueled a fierce and fundamental debate. Are we looking at a true language, perhaps encoding names, titles, and short dedicatory phrases? Or is this an elaborate system of non-linguistic symbols, a kind of Bronze Age corporate logo or administrative code used to mark goods, properties, and origins in a vast trading empire? The seals, often found far from their source, might have been stamps of authenticity, their combinations of animal and sign communicating not a sentence, but a concept like fine wool from Mohenjo-Daro. The silence of the Indus script is a different kind of haunting. It is not the silence of a single lost object, but the collective murmur of millions, a bustling civilization reduced to whispers we can almost but not quite understand. The tragedy of the Indus script lies in its frustrating brevity, but for our fourth inscription, the opposite is true. The wooden tablets of Rapa Nui, known as Easter Island, are covered from edge to edge in dense, beautiful, and utterly baffling glyphs. This is Rongorongo, a script of intricate symbols depicting birdmen with curved beaks, frigate birds, fish, turtles, and complex geometric forms, all carved with a shark's tooth in a unique Boustrophedon style. This means the lines of text do not simply run left to right, but reverse direction with each new line, like an ox plowing a field, so the reader must physically turn the tablet 180 degrees to follow the flow. The discovery of these tablets, however, came with a shattering historical blow. They were first documented by European missionaries in the 1860s, who noted with alarm that the native Rapa Nui people seemed to chant from them during ceremonies. In a devastating act of cultural erasure, early converts to Christianity, urged on by the missionaries, burned the majority of these sacred tablets as pagan idols. Then, within just a few years, Peruvian slave raids descended upon the island, carrying off the king, his family, and the last remaining elders who held the knowledge of how to read the script. The final known reader died in captivity abroad. In a single generation, the living key to this writing system was extinguished, leaving behind only 24 surviving fragments of wood, their eloquent carvings now mute. What were these tablets trying to preserve? One fascinating but unproven hypothesis suggests Rongorongo may have been a direct echo of the island's most famous mystery. Could the same society that conceived and moved the colossal Moai statues, those stone giants gazing inland, have also developed a unique written language to record genealogies, creation chants, or navigation lore? Some researchers see a tantalizing, though circumstantial, link, proposing that the script's invention was not independent, but perhaps inspired by a glimpse of Spanish writing during a brief landing in 1770. Others fiercely counter that the script's sophistication and clear integration into ritual suggests a much older, purely indigenous invention. Modern efforts to understand Rongorongo involve meticulous digital cataloging of every stroke and glyph, searching for statistical patterns that might reveal a hidden grammar. Linguists look for repeating sequences that could mark the beginnings of chants or names of gods, while other scholars wonder if the glyphs are not phonetic at all, but a form of memory aid for priests to recall vast oral traditions. Each surviving tablet is a ghostly echo of a lost ceremony, a hymn sung to the rhythm of waves against the shore, now reduced to a beautiful, silent puzzle. Beneath the sun-drenched ruins of Crete's great palace at Knossos, another script whispers from the clay. Here, in the labyrinthine corridors of Europe's first high civilization, administrators of the Minoan Empire pressed styluses into soft clay to keep their world in order. These are the linear tablets, and they represent a tantalizing double mystery. We know what they are, but we have no idea what they say. These small, palm-sized records are filled with neat, linear markings, a combination of abstract symbols and stylized pictures, listing commodities, people, and places. Their purpose was almost certainly practical, a bureaucratic ledger tracking jars of olive oil, bushels of grain, textiles, and perhaps offerings to the gods. The profound frustration for historians is that we can recognize the system, but the language itself is locked away. This is because a later script called Linear B, found at Knossos and on the Greek mainland, was brilliantly deciphered in the 1950s. That breakthrough revealed Linear B to be an early form of Greek used by the Mycenaeans to administer their palaces. Linear A, however, is fundamentally different. It is the written voice of the earlier, more enigmatic Minoans themselves, a people whose culture and language remain largely unknown to us. The two scripts share many of the same symbols, like a son using his father's tools for a completely different trade. Scholars can look at a linear tablet and recognize the symbol for fig, or woman, or total, because they match the deciphered Linear B signs, but the surrounding words, the grammar, the very sound of the Minoan tongue are lost. This means we can often guess a tablet's general topic, inventory of goods, but we cannot read the names of the places, the people, or the specific transactions. Deciphering Linear would be nothing short of revolutionary. It would crack open the worldview of a civilization that thrived 1,000 years before classical Athens, a society of vibrant frescoes, elaborate palaces, and vast maritime trade. We could move beyond archaeology's silent artifacts and finally hear the Minoans speak, understanding their economy, their religious practices, and perhaps even their myths. Until then, these humble clay tablets sit as silent accountants, holding the detailed ledger of a magnificent lost world, their numbers clear, their story utterly mute. Deep within the ruins of ancient Iran, a different kind of accounting took shape. The proto-Elamite script emerges from the dust around 5,200 years ago, making it one of the very first experiments in writing humanity ever produced. It appeared almost simultaneously with the earliest cuneiform in Mesopotamia, as if the very idea of recording information was a spark that jumped across the region. The medium was familiar, small clay tablets pressed with a stylus. The content, however, was purely practical. These tablets are not epic poems or royal decrees. They are inventories, lists of sheep and goats, quantities of grain, and measures of labor. The script itself is a mix of recognizable pictographs, like simplified drawings of animals and vessels, alongside a sophisticated and complex system of numerical notation using different shaped signs for different types of items. This was the birth of bureaucracy in stone and clay. Yet for all its innovation, Proto-Elamite presents a paradox of monumental scale. It developed with astonishing speed into a full system, was used for perhaps only a century or two, and then vanished completely, replaced by other forms of writing. Why would such a powerful tool be abandoned so quickly? The decipherment challenge here is immense, built on three towering obstacles. First, the corpus is small, with only about 1,600 known tablets, and many of those are short or fragmentary. Second, the numerical system is so intricate that scholars are still debating how to properly interpret the counts, unsure if a sign means 10 units of barley or 100 units of a different commodity. But the third and greatest wall is the absence of a Rosetta Stone. There is no bilingual text, no proto-Elamite inscription paired with a known language to provide the key. This leaves linguists with a haunting question. Does the script encode an early form of the Elamite language, a tongue spoken in the region for millennia but still poorly understood itself? Or is it something else entirely, a unique administrative language invented for the ledger books and forgotten when the economy that needed it changed? To crack Proto-Elamite would be to hear the first pragmatic thoughts of a nascent civilization, the dry but vital records of its wealth and work. Its silence is the silence of a first draft, a brilliant idea written down and then lost before the story could truly begin. The idea that writing was born in Mesopotamia and Egypt is a story we tell ourselves, but a piece of wood pulled from a Greek lake threatens to rewrite it entirely. In 1992, during an archaeological excavation at a prehistoric lakeshore settlement in Despilio, Greece, researchers made a find that sent shockwaves through the study of ancient communication. It was a wooden tablet, waterlogged and preserved by the mud, and across its surface were a series of clearly carved linear symbols. The symbols are not random scratches, they appear deliberate and structured, arranged in rows. The truly staggering part is the date. Through careful analysis of the surrounding archaeological layers, this tablet was assigned an age of around 7,260 years old. That places its creation roughly in the year 5,260 before Christ. If these markings constitute any form of writing, it would predate the earliest known cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia by over 2,000 years. The implications are monumental. This small piece of wood could shatter the traditional cradle of civilization narrative, suggesting that the human impulse to encode language into symbols may have sparked independently and much earlier on the shores of a European lake. The controversy, however, is as deep as the lake itself. What exactly are we looking at? Skeptical scholars argue the symbols could be proto-writing, a system of owner's marks or tallies for counting possessions, like a prehistoric inventory tag. They might represent a personal signature or clan symbol, meaningful to a small group but not a full linguistic system. Others, looking at the linear arrangement and distinct character set, propose it could be an early, localized form of record keeping, perhaps tracking lunar phases, seasonal cycles, or community events. The haunting possibility is that the Despilio tablet represents a lost beginning, a script that emerged, was used by a Neolithic community for generations, and then vanished without a trace, leaving no descendants. Its silence is profound because it speaks to a potential path not taken, a parallel invention of writing that flickered out, leaving this single, enigmatic artifact as its sole witness. The debate continues because the tablet is an island, a solitary data point with no other examples to compare it to. Was it the first chapter of a story never finished, or simply a thoughtful person's private notation, never meant to be read by anyone else? Either way, it forces us to question a fundamental timeline of human ingenuity, whispering that the history of how we record our thoughts may be far older and far more mysterious than we ever dared to believe. High in the rocky cliffs of the Rhodope Mountains in Bulgaria, a cave wall holds a secret that divides experts. The Sutovo inscription is a collection of about 50 deeply incised linear marks arranged in a rough grid across the stone surface. They are not pictures of animals or gods, but a series of straight lines, angles, and T-shapes, some intersecting, some standing alone, all carved with apparent deliberation. To the untrained eye, they look like a purposeful, if cryptic, code. This is where the consensus ends and the mystery truly begins. The prevailing view among mainstream archaeologists is one of profound skepticism. They point out that the markings lack the repeating patterns and clear sign groups we associate with true writing systems. The lines, they argue, could be the result of natural geological processes, like the slow scraping of harder rock against softer stone over millennia. Alternatively, they might be much more recent, perhaps medieval or even early modern boundary markers, quarry notations, or simple graffiti left by shepherds seeking shelter. In this view, the Setovo marks are an accident of geology or a casual human act, mistakenly elevated to the status of an ancient script by our powerful desire to find meaning in every line. But on the fringe of academia, a more tantalizing narrative persists. Some researchers look at the angular forms and see a potential connection to the ancient Thracians, the enigmatic warrior culture that thrived in the Balkans long before the Romans arrived. Could this be a rare example of a Thracian script, a sacred inscription meant for a cave used in initiation rites? Others push the origin even further back, suggesting the symbols bear a vague resemblance to early Bronze Age signs from the Aegean, hinting at a lost network of communication across the mountains. The power of the Setovo inscription lies not in a likely decipherment, but in the fundamental question it forces us to confront. Where exactly is the line between a random scratch and a letter, between natural erosion and intentional communication? Every cave wall is a canvas, and throughout human history, we have marked them for countless reasons: to claim territory, to record a spiritual vision, or simply to say, "I was here." The Setovo markings sit right on that blurred boundary. They challenge our definitions and remind us that our interpretation of the past is often a reflection of our hopes. We so desperately want the lines to speak that we must constantly ask ourselves, are we listening to a whisper from antiquity, or are we hearing only the echo of our own curiosity in the silent dark of a mountain cave? 3 small clay tablets from a Romanian village ignite a firestorm that reaches back to the dawn of civilization itself. Unearthed in 1961 near the village of Tartaria, these objects are modest in size but monumental in their implications. Each one is small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, and they are incised with a series of symbols: a spiral, a goat-like figure, and other linear marks that bear a startling, almost eerie resemblance to early Sumerian pictographs from Mesopotamia. The problem and the source of the fierce controversy is their proposed age. Found in a pit alongside ancient human bones, they were initially dated by the archaeologists to around 5,300 years before Christ. If that date holds, and if these symbols are indeed a form of writing, the Tartaria tablets would be centuries older than the earliest known cuneiform. This would turn the established narrative of history on its head, suggesting that writing did not emerge first in the fertile river valleys of the Middle East, but perhaps in the heart of Neolithic Europe. The debate that erupted was not just academic, it was a battle over the very origins of a world-changing technology. Skeptical scholars launched a powerful counter-argument. They proposed that the tablets were not Neolithic treasures at all, but much later objects, perhaps from the Bronze Age or even later, that somehow fell into an older archaeological layer, a process called contamination. Could they have been dropped into an ancient burial pit by a farmer millennia later, or been part of a later ritual that reused a sacred site? This would neatly explain the symbolic similarity to Sumerian script, as they would simply be a later derivative product. To understand the core of this mystery, we must look at the broader culture that produced them. The tablets belong to what archaeologists call the Inca culture, a sophisticated Neolithic society that flourished across the Balkans between 5,500 and 4,500 years before Christ. The Inca people lived in large, settled towns, mastered copper metallurgy, and created stunning figurines and pottery. Crucially, they also produced a vast array of artifacts marked with recurring symbols, often called the Inca symbols. These marks appear on pottery, spindle whorls, and figurines, and they include a repertoire of hundreds of signs, from crosses and chevrons to more complex comb-like shapes. This is where the heart of the academic war still rages today. Do these widespread, recurring Inca symbols represent a true proto-writing system, a script used for economic or religious purposes, or are they something else entirely, a rich system of ritual symbolism, ownership marks, or decorative motifs with shared cultural meaning but no linguistic content? The Tartaria tablets are the most famous and most hotly contested pieces of this puzzle. Their symbols are more complex and arranged more deliberately than single marks on a pot, which fuels the argument for writing. Yet their isolation, just 3 tablets, makes it impossible to detect a grammar or syntax. They stand at the precipice between symbol and script. Deciphering them is not just about translating marks, it is about answering a profound question. Did the human mind in southeastern Europe independently stumble upon the same revolutionary idea as the scribes of Sumer, encoding thought into permanent form? Or are we, desperate for a lost chapter, misreading the elegant graffiti of a deeply spiritual people? The tablets refuse to answer, holding their silence across more than 7 millennia, a tiny, tangled root of a question about where our story truly began. The debate over first beginnings finds a dramatic echo far across the Atlantic, not in clay or on cave walls, but on a heavy slab of serpentine stone. In a gravel quarry in the Mexican state of Veracruz, workers unearthed a block that would fundamentally challenge the story of writing in the Americas. This is the Cascajal block, a rectangular stone tablet weighing about 12 kilograms, and its surface tells a story in 62 mysterious symbols. The symbols are arranged in clear, horizontal rows, some repeated, others unique, carved with intention into the rock. They depict a fascinating array of forms: an insect, an ear of corn, a throne-like seat, and abstract shapes that defy easy identification. What makes this block so revolutionary is its origin and its age. It is definitively tied to the Olmec civilization, the so-called mother culture of Mesoamerica, and through careful analysis of the surrounding archaeological context, it has been dated to approximately 900 years before Christ. This places its creation nearly 4 centuries before the earliest known Maya writing. If this is a true script, the Cascajal block represents the earliest writing system ever discovered in the entire Western Hemisphere. The implications are staggering. It suggests that the Olmec, the builders of the colossal stone heads and the first great cities of Mexico, were not just master sculptors and architects, but also inventors of a written language. This would elevate our understanding of their society from a powerful cultural force to a full-fledged literate civilization, capable of recording laws, histories, or divine proclamations. Yet, as with all our mysteries, certainty remains elusive. The symbols on the block are utterly unique. They do not form a direct, linear ancestor to the later and well-understood Maya glyphs, which means the Olmec script, if that is what it is, may represent a separate, independent experiment in writing that eventually died out. Scholars are engaged in a meticulous process of analysis, not to translate the text but to answer a more basic question: does this arrangement of symbols constitute a true writing system? They look for patterns, for the repetition of certain signs in different combinations, which would suggest a phonetic component where signs represent sounds. They examine the order and layout for grammatical structure. The alternative is that the block holds a ceremonial or ritual text, perhaps a series of sacred symbols meant to be recited or chanted by a priest, a sequence of powerful images rather than a record of spoken language. Deciphering even a fraction of the Cascajal block would open a window directly into the Olmec mind. We could move beyond interpreting their art and monuments from the outside and begin to understand their internal world, their concepts of kingship, their relationship with their gods, and the administrative logic that held their far-reaching trade networks together. This heavy stone is a cornerstone, waiting for us to learn how to read the foundation of an entire hemisphere's written tradition. a world away from the sun-baked stones of Mesoamerica, a very different kind of book surfaced in the heart of Europe, wrapped in layers of deliberate confusion. The Voynich Codex arrived in Hungary in the early 19th century, a small, leather-bound volume donated to a scholarly academy. Its 448 pages are dense with a flowing, cursive script written right to left, an alphabet of nearly 200 unique characters that looks like nothing else on Earth. Flipping through, you are met with strange, childlike illustrations that deepen the mystery, scenes that mix crucifixions with crescent moons, Christian saints alongside what appear to be Ottoman soldiers, all in a bewildering fusion of religious iconography. It is as if the book was compiled by someone who had only heard descriptions of faiths from a great distance and tried to stitch them all together. The Codex history is as murky as its text. It seemingly appeared from nowhere, with no credible provenance tracing it back to a library or an archaeological find. This shadowy origin has fueled a century-long parade of failed decipherments, each more sensational than the last. Amateur cryptographers and professional linguists alike have stepped forward, claiming to have cracked its code, only to produce translations that are comically contradictory. One declared it a record of medieval Hungarian history, another a heretical religious text in a lost dialect of Romanian, a third a secret chronicle of early Christianity in India. None of these solutions have gained acceptance because they all share a fatal flaw. The underlying rules they propose for the script cannot be consistently applied to the entire text, often collapsing into gibberish after a few promising pages. This pattern of repeated, spectacular failure points strongly to one unsettling possibility, that the Voynich Codex is not a cipher hiding a real language at all, but an elaborate and masterful hoax. The leading theory among many scholars is that it was created in the 18th or early 19th century, perhaps by a Hungarian nobleman with too much time and a deep knowledge of antiquities, as an attempt to fabricate a mysterious relic, possibly for financial gain or simply for the intellectual challenge of fooling the experts. The mixed religious symbols could then be seen not as profound syncretism, but as decorative elements borrowed from various traditions to enhance the artifact's exotic and ancient appearance. Yet a stubborn minority of researchers refuses to dismiss it entirely. They ask, what if it is genuine? What if it represents the work of an isolated religious community, perhaps in the borderlands between empires where Christian, Muslim, and pagan traditions genuinely intermingled into a unique creed? Could it be the liturgical text of a forgotten sect, its language invented to protect sacred mysteries from outsiders? The Codex's true power lies in this unresolvable tension. It is either a brilliant forgery that has outsmarted generations, a testament to human ingenuity in deception, or it is a genuine artifact from a world so singular and blended that we lack the framework even to begin understanding it. It sits in its museum case not as a puzzle waiting for a key, but as a mirror, reflecting back our own desperate desire for the past to confess its secrets, even if those secrets were never really there to begin with. A slab of sandstone once watched over a bustling river mouth, a silent sentinel to 1,000 years of trade and tides. This was the Singapore Stone, a massive monolith that stood at the entrance to the Singapore River, its surface carved with 50 or so lines of elegant, unknown script. Based on its style and location, scholars believe it dates from the 10th to the 13th centuries, a time when Singapore was likely a thriving outpost in the vast maritime networks that connected China, India, and the islands of Southeast Asia. The stone was a landmark, a piece of the landscape that held a message from the founders of this global port city. And then, with a single act of colonial expediency, it was shattered. In 1843, British engineers clearing the riverbank to build a fort and expand a military barracks deemed the massive stone an obstacle. They drilled holes into it, packed them with gunpowder, and blew the ancient artifact to pieces. the largest surviving fragment, bearing a portion of the inscription, was saved and sent to a museum, but even this piece was later lost, leaving behind only 19th century sketches and paper casts of the mysterious text. The script itself is the core of the enigma. The characters are curvilinear and sophisticated, utterly unlike the Chinese or Arabic scripts that later dominated the region. The leading theory suggests it may be a variant of Old Javanese or an early form of the Kawi script, used for writing Sanskrit and Old Javanese on the islands of Java and Bali. Another possibility is that it is a form of early Tamil brought by traders from southern India. If either is true, the Singapore stone could have been a royal proclamation, a boundary marker, or a dedication to the gods by a powerful merchant prince, a foundational document for one of the world's great crossroads. Its destruction represents more than just the loss of an artifact. It is the erasure of a potential Rosetta Stone for early Southeast Asian history. That stone fragment could have helped linguists finally bridge the gap between ancient Indian scripts and their later Southeast Asian descendants, unlocking a clearer understanding of how ideas, religions, and power flowed across the ancient sea lanes. Instead, we are left with ghostly impressions on paper, a few lines of beautiful script that greet every question with the same silent answer, a reminder that history is not just written, it is also tragically unwritten by the hands of progress. While the Singapore stone was a casualty of colonial expansion, our next inscription was the deliberate creation of an empire determined to forge its own identity. The Kitten-large script stands as a monumental declaration of independence, carved in stone by a people who refused to be absorbed by their mighty neighbor. In the 10th century, the Kitten people, fierce nomadic horsemen from the Mongolian steppe, did something extraordinary. They conquered a vast swath of northern China and established the powerful Liao dynasty. To rule this new, sophisticated empire, they needed more than just military might. They needed a voice of their own. So, under the decree of their founding emperor, they created an entirely new writing system. This was not a casual adaptation. It was a state-sponsored project, a script designed to translate the spoken Kitten language into a form equal in prestige to the revered Chinese characters. The result was the Kitten-large script, a beautiful and complex system that borrowed the very concept of writing from China but built its own linguistic house. The characters look at first glance strikingly similar to Chinese, with the same blocky, square form and intricate strokes, but the similarity is a deliberate mask. The Kitten script operates on a different internal logic. It is a mix of logographic and phonetic elements. Some characters represent entire words or concepts, like a drawing of a mountain meaning mountain. Others represent sounds, syllables that could be combined to spell out words, especially for foreign names or abstract ideas. This hybrid approach shows a deep understanding of how writing works, a sophisticated tool crafted for administration, literature, and recording laws. Yet, for all its imperial backing and clear structure, the Kitten-large script remains one of history's most stubborn locked doors. The reason is both simple and devastating, a critical lack of lengthy bilingual texts. We have inscriptions, yes, monumental pillars and tomb epitaphs carved with both Kitten and Chinese, but these bilingual texts are frustratingly brief. They typically provide little more than names, titles, and formal phrases, like the equivalent of a modern bilingual sign that says exit and salida. You can match a few words, but you cannot reconstruct a language from them. You cannot grasp its grammar, its verb conjugations, or the flow of a complex sentence. Without a longer text, a true Rosetta Stone that provides a parallel narrative in a known language, the script's full system remains just out of reach. Scholars have made painstaking progress, identifying perhaps a few hundred characters with reasonable confidence, often by context, like a character that appears repeatedly on memorials for emperors, likely meaning emperor. But the vast majority of the known several thousand characters are still silent. This presents a profound historical puzzle. The Liao dynasty was a major empire that lasted over 200 years, rivaling Song China in power and cultural achievement. It minted coins, built grand cities, and negotiated complex treaties. Its primary script was used on everything from official seals to religious texts. How can the written voice of such a significant and well-documented civilization remain so elusive? The answer lies in the cruel turns of history. The Khitan Empire eventually fell, and their people were scattered and assimilated. Their written records, likely stored in archives on perishable materials like wood and silk, were lost to time, war, and neglect. The stone inscriptions that survived are monumental but limited in scope, freezing formal state language in granite but leaving the living, breathing tongue behind. Deciphering the Khitan large script would do more than satisfy linguistic curiosity. It would crack open the inner world of a steppe empire from its own perspective. We have Chinese accounts of the Khitan, but they are written by outsiders, often with bias. To read a Khitan history, a poem, or a legal code in their own script would be to hear their story in their own voice, to understand how they saw themselves, their gods, and their place between the steppe and the zone. Until that key is found, the script stands as a majestic but silent monument, a testament to an empire's pride and history's relentless silence. But the Khitan did not stop with one script. Alongside the monumental large script, they developed a second, more streamlined system known as the Khitan small script. This was not a simplified version of the first, but an entirely different invention, created just a few years later under the reign of a different emperor. Where the large script borrowed the visual form of Chinese characters, the small script took a more phonetic path. Its characters are often simpler, composed of 1 to 7 strokes, and they were designed primarily to represent the sounds of the spoken Khitan language. Think of it as the difference between learning the meaning of thousands of complex symbols and learning a much smaller alphabet of sounds you can combine to form words. This was a sophisticated linguistic choice, suggesting the Khitan scribes were experimenting with the most efficient way to record their speech. The coexistence of these two scripts deepens the mystery exponentially. Why would a civilization invent two complete writing systems at almost the same time? Scholars believe they served different purposes. The large script, with its imposing, character-like forms, was likely used for formal inscriptions, imperial decrees, and monuments, projecting power and permanence. The small script, being more efficient to write, was probably the tool of everyday administration for letters, legal documents, and perhaps literature. This means that to fully understand the Khitan Empire, we need to decipher not one locked door, but two, each leading to different rooms in the same vast palace. The challenge is immense. Having two unknown writing systems from the same culture is like trying to solve a crossword puzzle where the clues are in a different unsolved crossword. Progress on the small script has been slightly better precisely because of its phonetic nature. By comparing it to later scripts used by descendant peoples like the Mongols and the Manchus, linguists have tentatively identified the sounds for a handful of its characters. Recent breakthroughs have come from an unexpected source, not grand stone pillars but buried memorial tablets. Archaeologists have unearthed several small, inscribed stone tablets from Khitan tombs. These epitaphs often follow a standard formula, listing the name, titles, ancestry, and death date of the deceased. This repetitive structure provides a crucial framework. By finding the same sequences of small script characters in the same positions on different tablets, and by using the scant clues from known words or dates, researchers can make educated guesses. For instance, if a particular character cluster always appears before a series of characters that might represent numbers, it could logically mean died in the year of. It is a painstaking statistical detective game, building meaning one tentative brick at a time. Each new tablet discovery is a potential key, slowly helping scholars map the sounds and grammar of this lost tongue. Yet for all this incremental progress, the small script remains largely a mystery. We can pronounce a few of its syllables, but we cannot read its stories. We can guess the topic of an inscription, but we cannot hear the voice of the person it commemorates. The two kitten scripts stand together, a testament to a culture's determination to be heard on its own terms, and a reminder that sometimes the past speaks in two different whispers, both equally urgent and both waiting for us to learn how to listen. The kitten scripts were not the last to rise and fall on the windswept plains of Northeast Asia. Their legacy lived on in the hands of their successors, the Jurchen people. In the 12th century, the Jurchen erupted from the forests of Manchuria to conquer northern China, toppling the Khitan Liao dynasty and establishing their own powerful Jin dynasty. To govern this vast multicultural empire, they too needed a written voice, so they did what many expanding powers do: they borrowed and adapted. The Jurchen script was a deliberate hybrid created by imperial decree around the year 1120. Its creators looked to the two great writing systems they knew, taking the basic blocky form and some logographic principles from Chinese characters, while also borrowing structural ideas and perhaps specific characters from the Khitan scripts they had just overthrown. The result was a unique writing system that stood as a symbol of Jurchen identity and administrative control, used for over 3 centuries on monuments, official seals, and documents. Yet today, the Jurchen script speaks in fragments. The primary obstacle to decipherment is brutally simple: we simply do not have enough of it. The corpus of known Jurchen texts is tiny, consisting of a handful of stone inscriptions, some bronze mirrors, seals, and a scant few pages of manuscript material. There is no long, continuous text, no epic poem or legal code that would allow linguists to see the language in full flow. This scarcity makes the puzzle nearly impossible to solve, as there are not enough repeating patterns or contextual clues to build a reliable translation. Imagine trying to learn English if you only had a dozen random sentences from different billboards and gravestones. You might guess a few words, but you could never grasp the grammar. The historical stakes of this silence are significant. The Jin dynasty was a major empire, a sophisticated state that rivaled the southern Song dynasty in China proper. It minted coins, built grand capitals like modern-day Beijing, and developed a complex bureaucracy. Deciphering the Jurchen script would allow us to move beyond the histories written by their Chinese rivals and enemies. We could finally access the empire's own records, understanding how the Jurchen themselves viewed their conquests, their laws, their treaties, and their fusion of steppe and sedentary cultures. It would fill a critical gap in the history of Northeast Asia, revealing the administrative machinery and cultural ambitions of a people who were the direct ancestors of the later Manchus, who would go on to found the Qing dynasty. Each carved Jurchen character is a piece of a lost blueprint, a clue to how a nomadic people transformed themselves into imperial rulers, and why their written voice was ultimately swallowed by the sands of time. Yet for all the silence of the steppe scripts, some ancient voices speak in a whisper we can almost hear. The Etruscans of ancient Italy present a tantalizing paradox. We know their alphabet, borrowed and adapted from the Greeks, and we can sound out their words with relative ease. Thousands of inscriptions survive, carved on tombs, etched onto mirrors, and stamped onto pottery. From these, scholars have pieced together a basic vocabulary of daily life, numbers, family relationships, and the names of gods. We can read a funerary epitaph and understand, this is the tomb of Loth Velcher, son of Arnth. But the moment we step beyond these straightforward declarations into the realm of their deeper thoughts, the light fails. Longer religious and ritual texts, the very documents that would reveal the Etruscan soul, remain stubbornly opaque. Two artifacts exemplify this frustrating barrier. The first is one of the most bizarre survivals from antiquity, the Zagreb mummy wrappings. In 19th century Egypt, a mummy was purchased by a Croatian traveler. When the linen strips were carefully unwound years later, scholars made a stunning discovery. The linen was not Egyptian but Etruscan. This long, sacred text, known as the Liber Linteus or Linen Book, had been cut into strips and reused by Egyptian embalmers to wrap a completely unrelated body. It is the longest known Etruscan text by far, a continuous ritual calendar over 1,300 words long. We can read every letter. We can see the careful structure, the listings of dates and gods' names. But the specific ceremonies prescribed, the prayers to be recited, the theological reasons for each act are lost. The vocabulary for these complex spiritual concepts simply has no parallel in languages we know. It is like having a detailed cookbook from an alien cuisine, where you recognize the words for stir and fire, but the ingredients themselves are unidentifiable plants from another world. The second key artifact, the Pyrgi tablets, adds another layer of international intrigue. Found at a port sanctuary, these are 3 gold foil tablets from around 500 before Christ. 2 are written in Etruscan, and 1, crucially, is in Phoenician, a well-understood language. This is a rare bilingual text, a dedication from the Etruscan ruler of the city to the Phoenician goddess Astarte. The Phoenician text gives the gist, a king making an offering. The parallel Etruscan text, however, is not a word-for-word translation. It is a longer, more elaborate version, filled with formal ritual language and honorific titles that we cannot fully decipher. So even with a guide, the nuances of Etruscan sacred protocol slip through our fingers. This is the core of the mystery. The Etruscans were not some obscure tribe. They were the dominant cultural force in early Italy, the ones who taught Rome everything from architecture and divination to the symbols of political power. Roman kings were Etruscan. The famous Capitoline wolf is an Etruscan bronze. Yet, when we try to listen to their own voice explaining their beliefs, we hit a wall of specialized, lost terminology. We see the outline of their rituals in tomb paintings and temple foundations, but we cannot hear the chants that brought those rituals to life. Deciphering these longer texts would be like turning on the sound in a silent film of Rome's formative influences. We would finally understand the spiritual handbook that guided the people who shaped the early Roman Republic, hearing not through the later Roman lens, but through the original, mysterious voice of the teachers themselves. For now, that voice remains a beautiful, articulate murmur, just on the other side of a wall we have not yet learned how to breach. The struggle to hear the Etruscans is a battle with specialized vocabulary, but for our 17th inscription, the mystery is one of pure potential. From the ancient Phoenician port city of Byblos, namesake of the Bible itself, comes a tantalizing glimpse of a script caught between 2 worlds. Known as the Byblos syllabary, these inscriptions are not grand monuments, but a handful of short texts carved onto bronze tablets and spatulas, dating back to the 2nd millennium before Christ. The entire known corpus is heartbreakingly small, just around 10 fragmentary inscriptions. Yet within these brief lines, scholars see something extraordinary, a possible missing link in one of history's most important stories, the invention of the alphabet. The script itself is beautifully clear and systematic. It consists of about 120 distinct signs, a number far too small for a logographic system like Chinese, but far too large for a simple alphabet of 20 or 30 letters. This perfect middle ground strongly suggests a syllabic system, where each sign represents a consonant-vowel combination like ba or tu. This structural clue is what makes the Byblos syllabary so historically magnetic. It appears in the exact time and place where a revolutionary transition was occurring. For centuries, the dominant writing system in the region was Egyptian hieroglyphs, a complex script requiring knowledge of hundreds of pictorial signs. But in the trading hubs of Canaan, like Byblos, there was a pressing need for a simpler, faster way to record transactions and communications. The theory is that the Byblos syllabary represents an experimental halfway house, a bridge between the pictorial hieroglyphs of Egypt and the streamlined, purely consonantal alphabet that the Phoenicians would later perfect and spread across the Mediterranean. It might be a local attempt to adapt the idea of Egyptian writing to a Semitic language, using signs for syllables instead of whole words, but what language does it record? The most compelling guess is an early form of Canaanite, the linguistic ancestor of Phoenician and Hebrew. The city of Byblos was a Canaanite city-state, and the script signs show some visual similarities to both early Egyptian and later Semitic letter forms. If this is true, then these bronze fragments hold the earliest attempts to write a language from the very family that would give us the Hebrew Bible and the Phoenician alphabet that shaped Greek and Latin. So why did this promising script vanish, leaving only these few scattered examples? The answer may lie in a brutal twist of competitive innovation. The syllabic system, while simpler than hieroglyphs, still required memorizing over 100 signs. Perhaps in the bustling, practical world of Phoenician merchants, a rival system was being developed simultaneously, one that was even more efficient, the first true alphabet. This new system, using just around 24 signs to represent consonants alone, may have simply outcompeted the syllabary. It was easier to learn, faster to write, and more adaptable for recording different languages. The Byblos syllabary could have been a brilliant local experiment that was rendered obsolete almost as soon as it was born, superseded by its own more successful cousin. These bronze tablets, then, are not a dead end but a frozen moment of trial and error. They are the sound of a civilization thinking out loud, working through the problem of how to trap speech in metal and stone. They represent a path that was explored, found useful for a time, and then abandoned for a better one. To decipher them would be to recover that lost moment of intellectual struggle, to hear the very first stuttering syllables of a script that almost changed the world before the alphabet swept it into silence. The polished stone axes of the Olmec, known as celts, hold secrets in miniature. These ceremonial objects, often made of precious jade, are sometimes incised with a handful of simple, elegant symbols. A dot, a bar, a stylized flame, or the profile of a bird. These are not the dense, road texts of the Cascadule block, but something far more elemental. The question they pose is fundamental. Are we looking at the first words of Mesoamerica, or just powerful pictures? Some scholars argue these marks are purely iconic, representing a specific deity or a concept understood at a glance. The ubiquitous word jaguar motif, a blending of human and big cat features, might be carved not as a word to be read, but as a direct image of a storm god's power. In this view, a Celt inscribed with such a symbol is not making a statement. It is embodying a force, a sacred object charged with meaning for the priest or ruler who wielded it. They could be akin to a royal seal or a maker's mark, identifying ownership or origin without constituting true writing. Yet other researchers see a crucial glimmer of something more linguistic. They point to sequences where symbols appear in a deliberate order, like a dot followed by a bar, which mirrors the later Maya Videshemal counting system. Could this be a numeral, a record of a date or a quantity? Some Celts show 2 or 3 symbols grouped together, a combination that might not just depict two things, but express a relationship, perhaps a name or a title. This is where the Celts become profoundly tantalizing. If these sequenced symbols represent early attempts to encode language, then they are not just art, they are the baby talk of Mesoamerican writing. They represent the moment a culture starts to experiment with the idea that a symbol can stand for a sound or a specific idea beyond a literal picture, the foundational step toward a full script. This would place them as a potential conceptual bridge between the symbolic iconography of Olmec art and the later, fully developed writing systems like the Isthmian script or the Maya glyphs. The Celts, then, are the whisper before the shout. They capture a civilization in the act of figuring out how to make stone speak, testing the boundaries between a sacred image and a sacred word. Each incised line is a trial, a wondering if this shape could hold more than just meaning, if it could hold language itself. The polished Celts of the Olmec may have been the first whispers, but in the dense tropical lowlands of Mexico's Isthmus of Tehuantepec, those whispers grew into a full, articulate voice. This is the Isthmian script, sometimes called the Epi-Olmec script, and it represents a sophisticated bridge between worlds. Flourishing around the year 500 AD, this system appears on a handful of magnificent stone monuments, the most famous being the La Mojarra Stela. This towering slab of stone is a masterpiece of ancient communication, covered from top to bottom in elegant, intricate glyphs arranged in neat columns. The script itself is a fascinating hybrid. It seamlessly blends the familiar Mesoamerican numerical system of dots and bars, used for counting and recording dates, with a rich array of pictorial glyphs depicting human figures, animals, and abstract symbols. You can look at it and immediately see the conceptual DNA that would later define the classic Maya inscriptions, yet it stands as its own complete and complex language. This is precisely why the Isthmian script is such a pivotal and frustrating mystery. Deciphering it could illuminate one of the greatest transitions in the ancient Americas, explaining how the cultural seeds planted by the Olmec blossomed into the Maya's legendary written tradition. It could reveal the history of a powerful but forgotten kingdom that once dominated this strategic corridor between the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific Ocean. The La Mojarra Stela likely records the deeds of a ruler, complete with dates of his accession and military victories, a royal biography frozen in stone. Yet we can only guess at his name, his enemies, and the specifics of his reign. The decipherment efforts have been mired in controversy. One prominent proposal, developed in the 1990s, suggested the script represented an early form of the Zoquian language. This decipherment, if accepted, would provide a breathtaking narrative from the stela, but it has not gained universal acceptance within the academic community. Other linguists have challenged the proposed grammatical rules and translations, arguing that the method is not consistently applicable to other Isthmian texts. The core of the problem is the same one that plagues so many of these ancient puzzles: a lack of a substantial bilingual text or a large enough body of writing to test theories against. We have a magnificent book, but only a few pages of it survive, so the stela stands, a gorgeous and silent sentinel. To unlock its code would be to open a door directly into a critical but shadowy chapter of Mesoamerican history, a time when kingdoms rose and fell in the humid air of the isthmus, their stories waiting for the day we finally learn how to read them. A single stone pulled from the roots of a Minnesota aspen tree in 1898 threatens to tear a hole in the history books. The Kensington runestone is a slab of greywacke, roughly the size of a tombstone, and across its face runs an inscription in Scandinavian rune. The story it tells is astonishing. It purports to be a record left by a party of Norse explorers, a mix of Swedes and Norwegians who journeyed far inland from the Atlantic coast. The text, dated to the year 1362, describes a tragic expedition where 10 men were killed by natives while the others were away fishing at their sea camp. It ends with a plea to God for their rescue. If genuine, this is not just a pre-Columbian artifact, it is proof of a Norse presence deep in North America, over a century after the Viking settlement at El Ants Ox Meadows and a full 130 years before Columbus. The implications would be staggering, forcing a complete re-evaluation of European contact with the New World. But from the moment it was revealed, the stone has been at the center of a firestorm, a perfect collision of patriotic hope and scholarly skepticism. The debate splits cleanly into two camps. On one side are those who believe it is a genuine medieval artifact, perhaps left by a lost expedition from the Greenland colonies venturing down the Hudson Bay and into the river systems of the continent's interior. They point to the physical wear on the inscription, which appears old, and to geological studies suggesting the weathering on the carved grooves is consistent with centuries of exposure. Some linguists argue the runic forms and the language used, a blend of Old Swedish and Old Norwegian, could plausibly reflect the dialect of a 14th century expedition. For proponents, the stone is a lonely, desperate message from history's losers, a group of explorers who vanished without a trace, their story waiting in the dirt for 600 years. The opposing view is just as passionate. Most academic linguists and historians dismiss the stone as an ingenious, emotionally powerful hoax, likely crafted by the Swedish immigrant farmer who found it, Olof Oman, and his neighbors in a community steeped in Scandinavian pride and folklore. The linguistic evidence is their strongest weapon. Critics highlight glaring anachronisms, words and grammatical constructions that seem more reflective of 19th century Swedish dialects than medieval Norse. The very date, written in a modern style as 1362, is suspect. Furthermore, the content of the message feels oddly convenient, a dramatic narrative perfectly tailored to capture the imagination of a late 19th century America fascinated by Viking legends and national origins. The geological evidence is also contested, with other analyses suggesting the weathering could have been artificially created or was not as ancient as claimed. This stone, therefore, represents a different kind of mystery entirely. It is not a script we cannot read, but a story we cannot trust. The Kensington runestone asks us a deeper, more uncomfortable question. How do we separate our longing for a heroic past from the hard, often inconvenient facts of evidence? It sits in a museum, not as a solved puzzle, but as a permanent question mark, a testament to the powerful human desire to find our own reflection, even in the weathered face of a rock. A ceramic bowl from the high plains of Bolivia carries a script that should not exist in the Americas. Known as the Fuente Magna, this vessel was reportedly discovered in the 1950s near Lake Titicaca, a region associated with the ancient Tiwanaku civilization. Its interior is inscribed with two distinct types of markings. One set consists of graceful, zoomorphic figures common to local Andean art. The other is the source of a firestorm, a series of linear grooves and wedge-shaped impressions that bear a startling resemblance to ancient Mesopotamian cuneiform and even to older Proto-Sumerian symbols. The immediate, instinctive question is the most obvious one. How did a script from the cradle of civilization, born between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, end up etched onto a bowl in the Bolivian Altiplano, over 12,000 feet above sea level? This single artifact ignites a fundamental clash between mainstream archaeology and alternative history, a debate about not just an object, but about the very boundaries of the ancient world. The mainstream position is one of profound and unified skepticism. Archaeologists point to the bowl's murky provenance. It was not excavated by professionals in a documented dig, but rather surfaced through private hands. Without a clear archaeological context, its age is impossible to verify scientifically. Experts in cuneiform note that while the symbols look superficially similar, they lack the precise, systematic arrangement of genuine Mesopotamian writing. The bowl's script, they argue, is an incoherent pastiche, a collection of signs that may have been copied from published sources by a modern forger, perhaps to create a sensational relic. Furthermore, they see no material or cultural evidence, no other artifacts, no traces of technology, no genetic links to support the monumental claim of sustained transoceanic contact between Sumer and the Andes. The idea is dismissed as a near impossibility, a fantasy that ignores the overwhelming archaeological record of independent development in the New World. On the opposing side, a small group of researchers and independent linguists champion the bowl as revolutionary evidence. They argue that the script is not a random copy, but a deliberate inscription that shows signs of grammatical structure. Some have even proposed tentative translations, suggesting the text is a dedication to a mother goddess, a plausible theme for a ceremonial vessel. For proponents, the Fuente Magna is not an anomaly to be dismissed, but a puzzle to be solved. They frame it within a broader, contested narrative of ancient seafarers, suggesting that contact across the oceans was not only possible but occurred more frequently than traditional models allow. Could a lone Sumerian vessel, they ask, have been blown off course, its survivors integrating into a local culture and leaving this one incredible artifact as their sole legacy? The bowl's power lies in this unresolvable tension. It forces us to confront the limits of our historical models. Is our view of the past too rigid, too quick to dismiss outliers that challenge the established story? Or is the disciplined skepticism a necessary guardrail against romantic speculation, a way to protect the integrity of history from well-meaning but mistaken interpretations? The Fuente Magna sits silently at the center of this storm, a simple piece of pottery asking an extraordinarily complex question. Are we looking at proof of a forgotten connection, or merely a reflection of our own deep desire for a more interconnected ancient world? The line between a revolutionary discovery and an elaborate fraud can be as thin as the edge of a spade. In 1924, a 17-year-old French farmhand named Émile Fradin was plowing a field near the village of Glozal when his cow stumbled into a hole. What he pulled from that damp earth would ignite one of the most vicious academic battles of the 20th century. It was not a single object but a treasure trove. Over the following years, Fradin and others unearthed hundreds of artifacts from the site, clay tablets inscribed with a strange, linear alphabet, along with carved bone pieces, curious idols, and polished stone tools. The tablets were the centerpiece, covered in symbols that looked vaguely like a mix of Phoenician letters and prehistoric runes. Here, it seemed, was evidence of a previously unknown Neolithic writing system in the heart of France, a find that could rewrite the prehistory of European literacy. The initial excitement among a few scholars quickly curdled into the bitter, decades-long drama known as the Glozal Affair. The field of archaeology fractured into warring camps. On one side, a handful of respected researchers staked their reputations on the tablets' authenticity, seeing in them a missing link between the symbolic marks of the Stone Age and the true alphabets of the Bronze Age. On the other side, the overwhelming majority of the establishment cried foul. They pointed to glaring inconsistencies. The artifacts seemed to come from a jumbled mix of time periods, with Neolithic tools found alongside what looked like medieval glass. The inscriptions themselves were suspiciously fresh, showing little weathering. Most damningly, new items kept appearing at the site precisely when certain sympathetic investigators came to visit, as if the ground itself was producing evidence on demand. Accusations of a sophisticated, long-running hoax flew freely, with fingers pointed directly at the Fradin family. The controversy grew so toxic that the International Institute of Anthropology was forced to intervene, forming a commission whose own findings were disputed before the ink was dry. It was less a scholarly debate and more a public spectacle of mistrust and wounded pride. Today, the consensus is nearly unanimous. Modern scientific techniques, including thermoluminescence dating carried out in the 1970s, have shown that the clay of the tablets was fired in the medieval period, not the Neolithic. The Glozal tablets are almost certainly a 20th century creation. Yet, to dismiss this as a simple case of forgery is to miss the deeper, more human mystery at its core. The Glozal Affair is a masterclass in the sociology of discovery. It reveals how desperately we want to find proof of a grand, unknown past, and how that desire can blind even intelligent minds. It shows how a local farmer, whether as a cunning trickster or a man caught in a lie that grew beyond his control, could hold the entire academic world hostage for decades. The script on the tablets is ultimately meaningless, a fabricated alphabet, but the story around them speaks volumes about the fragile line between evidence and belief, and how the hunger for a lost world can sometimes create a convincing replica of one right under our feet. A single, small stone from the dust of Shanidar Cave presents a challenge that cuts to the very core of what it means to be human. Found in the 1960s during excavations in northern Iraq, this palm-sized limestone cobble is unremarkable at first glance. But look closer and you will see a pattern of small, drilled holes clustered in groups, arranged with a symmetry that feels deliberate. This object was discovered in a layer of earth also containing the famous remains of Neanderthals, our ancient, thick-browed cousins. And that context ignites a radical, almost heretical idea. Could these holes be a form of symbolic notation, a deliberate record made by a Neanderthal mind over 50,000 years ago? The claim is breathtaking. It suggests that Neanderthals, long caricatured as simple brutes, possessed the capacity for abstract thought so advanced they might have been experimenting with a system to encode information, a precursor to writing itself. Imagine the implications: a different species of human, sharing our planet, developing its own way to mark meaning onto the physical world. It would shatter our understanding of cognitive evolution, placing the spark of symbolic communication far deeper in our shared family tree. The scientific community, however, meets this idea with profound and nearly universal skepticism. The criticisms are methodical and severe. First, the association between the stone and the Neanderthal remains is not airtight. The object was found in sediment, not clutched in a hand. It could have fallen from a higher, later layer or been carried in by burrowing animals. Second, and more fundamentally, is the pattern itself truly artificial? Geologists point out that natural processes can create astonishingly regular patterns in stone. The dissolution of softer mineral inclusions, the persistent drip of acidic water, or even the boring action of certain microorganisms can leave behind clusters of pits that mimic human work. Without clear tool marks around each hole, the evidence for deliberate drilling is circumstantial. Most archaeologists argue that if it is an artifact, it is far more likely to be a much later object, perhaps a Neolithic gaming piece or tally stone that somehow migrated down into the older layers, a case of archaeological contamination. To them, leaping to the conclusion of Neanderthal symbolism is not science, but a wishful narrative projected onto an ambiguous rock. Yet the possibility, however slim, refuses to fade. It persists because it speaks to a revolution in how we now see Neanderthals. Recent discoveries have painted a picture far removed from the primitive cave dweller. We now know they crafted sophisticated tools, buried their dead with care, used pigments, and wore ornaments like eagle talons. They had the cognitive hardware for complex thought. The Shanidar stone, if genuine, would be the ultimate extension of that capacity, not just abstract thought, but the externalization of it, the act of making a private idea public and permanent. This would not be writing as we know it, but it could be proto-writing, a system of marks whose meaning was agreed upon by a social group. Perhaps it was a lunar calendar tracking the phases of the moon. Maybe it was a hunting record, each cluster representing a different kind of prey. Or it could have been a map or a ritual object used in a ceremony we can never reconstruct. The stone's power lies in this agonizing duality. It is either a random product of geology, a lesson in how easily we see patterns where none exist, or it is one of the most profound artifacts ever unearthed, a message drilled in stone by a mind not quite our own, reaching across an unimaginable gulf of time. It asks us the most difficult question of all: are we listening to a whisper from a lost sibling species, or are we, in our loneliness, simply hearing the echo of our own voice in the dark, silent cave? Long before the first clay tablet was pressed, human hands were already shaping meaning. In the fertile lands of the Neolithic Near East, around 6,000 years before Christ, the people of the Olmecian culture were not just farming the land, they were farming ideas. Their legacy is not grand inscriptions, but small, humble objects, baked clay tokens in geometric shapes, spheres, cones, discs, and cylinders, often found alongside pottery marked with simple incised signs, lines, crosses, and chevrons. To the untrained eye, they look like children's toys or random scratches, but to an archaeologist, they are the fossilized sparks of a revolution, the the moment humanity began to externalize memory in a systematic way. This is the great debate: were these tokens and part marks just practical tools, or were they the first stumbling steps toward a true script? The utilitarian explanation is powerfully convincing. Imagine a village elder needing to track the community's wealth: a flock of 10 sheep, 4 jars of oil, 8 measures of grain. Instead of relying on a fallible memory, they could create a concrete, 3-dimensional record. A cone might represent a measure of grain, a sphere a sheep. These tokens could be stored in a clay envelope, a bulla, which could be sealed and even impressed with the tokens inside before baking, creating a receipt no one could dispute. The marks on pottery could be equally straightforward: a potter's personal signature, a mark of the vessel's capacity, or a symbol denoting the clan that owned it. In this view, the Yarmoukian artifacts are not writing, but a brilliant pre-literate accounting technology, a physical extension of the human mind designed for a specific economic purpose. Yet other scholars peer at these same objects and see the ghost of something more linguistic. They point to the consistency. Certain marks appear again and again across different sites within the Yarmoukian sphere, suggesting they were part of a shared symbolic vocabulary, not just personal whims. The tokens, too, show standardization: certain shapes consistently made in certain sizes. This regional systemization hints at a proto-script, a set of agreed-upon signs that could communicate information across time and space, even if that information was limited to quantities and types of goods. The tokens are 3-dimensional words, and the pot marks are their 2-dimensional shadows. This brings us to the most fascinating part of the mystery: the transition from object to symbol. How did we jump from holding a clay sheep in your hand to drawing a sign for sheep on a tablet? The Yarmoukian culture sits right on that thrilling cusp. One compelling theory involves those clay bulli, the sealed envelopes. A merchant or official, tired of breaking open a seal every time they needed to verify the contents, might have begun pressing the tokens into the soft clay of the envelope's surface before sealing them inside. That way, you could see the inventory at a glance. Over time, the realization might have dawned: if the impression is enough, why bother with the tokens inside at all? The 3-dimensional object could be discarded, and its 2-dimensional impression became the record. This simple administrative shortcut may have been the accidental birth of writing. A cone pressed into clay leaves a wedge, a sphere leaves a circle. From these basic impressions over centuries, the complex scripts of Mesopotamia would eventually evolve. So are the Yarmoukian tokens and marks writing, perhaps not in the way we define it today, but they are undoubtedly its direct ancestor. They represent the crystallization of a need, the need to make thought permanent, to communicate beyond the moment, and to hold a society's memory in something more durable than a human mind. In these small, baked pieces of clay, we are witnessing the very first sentence humanity ever tried to write, a sentence that said simply, "I own this." And from that simple statement, all the stories of civilization would eventually flow. Deep within the quiet soil of China's Henan province, a tortoise shell whispers of a ritual from a time before time. The Jiahu symbols are not an inscription in the grand sense, but a collection of marks carved onto turtle plastrons and bone artifacts, discovered at a Neolithic site dating back to an almost unimaginable 6,600 years before Christ. That is over 4,000 years older than the famous Shang dynasty oracle bones, long considered the dawn of Chinese writing. To hold one of these shells is to hold a fragment of a world 8 millennia past, a world where someone, for a reason we can only guess, took a sharp tool and carefully incised a sign. The symbols themselves are the source of a profound and quiet debate. Some, like a mark resembling a stylized eye or the character for sun, look undeniably similar to the later oracle bone script. This visual echo is what makes the Jiahu find so electrifying. Could this be the first faint spark of the Chinese writing system, a spark that would smolder for thousands of years before bursting into the full flame of a literary tradition? The consensus among scholars leans toward a more cautious, yet no less revolutionary interpretation. Most see the Jiahu marks not as a true writing system with grammar and syntax, but as proto-writing, a crucial step on that long evolutionary path. They are likely isolated pictographs, each one representing a specific object, concept, or perhaps a clan symbol, used in a ritual context, possibly for divination. Imagine a shaman heating a turtle shell until it cracked, then carving a symbol next to the fissure to record an omen or a dedication to an ancestor. The symbol held meaning, but it was not yet part of a chain of symbols that could convey a sentence or a story. This distinction is everything. It moves us from looking for a lost language to understanding a process of cultural gestation. The existence of these symbols suggests that the development of Chinese script was not a sudden invention, but an agonizingly slow evolution, a cultural seed planted in the Neolithic that took millennia to bear fruit. It was a process rooted in the most fundamental human concerns: ritual, communication with the spirit world, and the need to make a permanent mark of a fleeting moment. The tortoise shell, a creature symbolizing longevity and the cosmos, becomes the perfect canvas for this first, tentative act of recording. So while we may never read the Jiahu symbols as words, we can understand their deeper message. They tell us that the desire to write, to fix thought in a physical form, is ancient beyond our easy comprehension, and that the world's oldest continuously used writing system grew not from a single brilliant mind, but from the slow, persistent accumulation of meaning, carved one careful stroke at a time over countless generations. The geometric symbols of Banpo are a language of ownership, not literature, scratched onto pottery fragments from a Yongshao culture village along the Yellow River. These marks are starkly simple: crosses, lines, Z-shapes, and chevrons, repeated across vessels used for storing grain or cooking food. Dated to around 5,000 years before Christ, they are roughly contemporary with the earlier Jiahu symbols, yet they represent a different, more pragmatic branch of the same family tree. While Jiahu's tortoise shell carvings hint at ritual and divination, the Banpo marks speak to the daily life of a settled Neolithic community. They are almost certainly not writing in any linguistic sense. You cannot compose a sentence with them. Instead, they functioned as identifiers, likely clan symbols or the personal marks of individual potters. Think of them as the earliest trademarks or family crests, etched onto a clay pot to answer a basic social question: who made this and who does it belong to? In a village of hundreds where communal storage was vital, such marks would have been essential for managing resources and reinforcing social bonds. They tell us that these early farmers were not just living together, they were organizing themselves into distinct groups with a shared identity, an identity they felt compelled to stamp onto their most common possessions. The Banpo symbols, when placed alongside the more pictographic Jiahu marks, reveal the full spectrum of early symbolic communication. One leans toward the sacred, attempting to capture an omen or a plea to the ancestors. The other is utterly practical, managing the economics of a village. Both, however, are foundational. They show that the drive to make a mark, to say, "this is mine" or "this represents us," is a fundamental human impulse that predates kings, empires, and even full written language. These simple scratches are the quiet, everyday roots from which the mighty tree of Chinese civilization would eventually grow. The debate ignited by the Tartaria tablets cannot be contained to 3 small pieces of clay. It expands outward across centuries and hundreds of miles into the very fabric of a civilization. This is the world of the Inca symbols, a silent language etched not on rare tablets, but on the everyday objects of an entire culture. For over 1,000 years, from roughly 5,500 to 4,500 years before Christ, the people of the Inca culture in southeastern Europe lived in large, settled towns, mastered copper smelting, and created stunning anthropomorphic figurines. And on their pottery, their spindle walls, and those very figurines, they repeatedly inscribed a set of distinct signs. We find chevrons like stacked mountains, crosses inside circles, meandering lines that branch like rivers, and comb-like shapes. These are not random scratches. They appear with consistency on artifacts found from Serbia to Romania, suggesting a shared symbolic vocabulary understood across a wide region. The critical question, the one that has divided scholars for decades, is what exactly were these signs for? The mainstream archaeological consensus is clear and firm. This is not true writing. True writing, as we define it, is a graphic representation of speech, a system with signs that represent sounds or words, arranged by grammatical rules to record language. The Inca symbols show no evidence of this. They do not appear in linear sequences that could be read as sentences. Instead, a single symbol, or sometimes a small cluster, is placed prominently on an object, often on the base of a pot or the body of a statue. They seem to function more like stamps or seals. Imagine a modern logo on the bottom of a ceramic mug or a maker's mark on a piece of jewelry. The symbol communicates ownership, origin, or perhaps a protective blessing, but it does not tell a story or record a transaction in linguistic detail. This points to their most likely purpose, a rich system of symbolic communication embedded in ritual and social life. A pot marked with a specific chevron might have been made for a particular clan's ceremonies. A figurine inscribed with a branching line could represent a specific deity or a concept like fertility or water. These signs were a way to encode social and religious meaning, to mark an object as belonging to a certain group or serving a specific spiritual function. They were a proto-script, a sophisticated visual code that conveyed complex ideas without representing spoken words. This system may have been so effective within its cultural context that there was no need for it to evolve into full writing. The community knew what the symbols meant, and that was enough. The tragedy, of course, is that we are not part of that community. We can catalog the signs, map their distribution, and guess at their meaning from context, but we cannot hear the incantation or understand the social rule that each one invoked. The Inca symbols represent a road not taken in the history of writing, a parallel path where symbolism remained supreme, and the leap to recording speech was never made. They are a beautiful, eloquent reminder that human communication is vast and varied, and that some of the most profound messages from the past are not sentences waiting to be read, but powerful images whose ceremony we can only dimly perceive. Legends of the Rapa Nui people speak not of invention but of inheritance. Oral histories passed down for generations tell of the first king, Hatu Mata, who led the original settlers to the shores of Easter Island. And they say he did not arrive empty-handed. According to the stories, his great canoe carried 67 sacred talking boards, wooden tablets already inscribed with the graceful glyphs of Rongorongo. This is a profound claim, one that shifts the entire mystery. It suggests the script was not born from the isolation of that remote island, but was a treasured cargo brought from a forgotten homeland, a complete written system imported across thousands of miles of open ocean. If the legend holds a kernel of truth, it transforms the tablets from a local creation into a potential library of lost history, a direct cultural lifeline to the ancestral Polynesian world. The search for that hypothetical homeland becomes a linguistic and archaeological detective story across the Pacific. Scholars scrutinize the glyphs for clues, looking for symbols that might depict plants or animals not native to Easter Island, perhaps pointing to a more tropical origin like the Marquesas or the Society Islands. They compare the elegant, reversed line script to other Pacific art forms, searching for stylistic cousins in tattoo patterns or petroglyphs. Could Rongorongo be a highly formalized version of a widespread symbolic language, one that only on Easter Island was committed to wood in such a systematic way? The tantalizing possibility is that these tablets are not just ritual texts but a history book. They could encode the very migration narrative of the Polynesian people themselves, recording the stars they steered by, the names of the islands they left behind, and the genealogies of the gods and heroes who led them. Each frigate bird or curved fishhook glyph might tell a chapter of an epic voyage. This makes the loss of the readers not just a cultural tragedy, but a historical catastrophe. We are left with the ghost of a library, its shelves holding volumes that could answer one of humanity's greatest questions: how did a seafaring people conquer the largest ocean on Earth? The talking boards, if they could speak, might tell us exactly that. The geometric symbols of Banpo and the ritual marks of Jaya, who show a world experimenting with meaning, but in the scorching sands of the Sinai Desert, a group of miners performed a true act of alchemy. They took the sacred writing of an empire and forged from it something revolutionary. This is the proto-Sinaitic script, a collection of crude inscriptions carved into rocks and stone slabs around the turquoise mines of Serabit el Qadam. Dated to approximately 1800 years before Christ, these markings are arguably the most important in this entire list, for they are likely the direct ancestor of the Phoenician alphabet, and by extension, every single alphabet you use today. It is the birth certificate of our A, B, C. The breakthrough in understanding Proto-Sinaitic came from a brilliant conceptual leap. Scholars realized the script was not a new invention from nothing, but a creative act of borrowing and simplification. The miners, who were likely Canaanite laborers working for the Egyptian pharaohs, were surrounded by the imposing, beautiful hieroglyphs of their overlords. But hieroglyphs were complex, requiring years of training, and they were designed to write the Egyptian language. These Canaanite workers needed a way to write their own Semitic tongue. So they did something ingenious. They looked at the Egyptian pictorial signs and applied a principle called acrophony. They took a hieroglyph of an object whose name in their own language began with a certain sound, and they let that picture stand for just that first sound. For example, they might have seen the Egyptian hieroglyph for house, which in their Canaanite language was pronounced bait. They then let that pictogram of a house represent not the word for house, but simply the consonant sound b. A picture of a hand, kaf, in their tongue became the sound k. A picture of water, mayim, became m. This was the monumental leap from a picture representing a whole word or concept to a picture representing a single consonant sound. It was the invention of the phonetic principle that defines an alphabet. Yet, for all its world-changing importance, the Proto-Sinaitic script remains shrouded in daily mystery. While the general decipherment is accepted and the alphabetic principle is clear, many of the individual inscriptions are frustratingly brief and enigmatic. They are often just a few characters long, likely recording names, short dedications, or ownership marks. Without longer texts, we cannot be certain of the exact phonetic values of every sign, and the grammar of these early sentences is elusive. Who exactly was M, the servant of B? What offering did K make to the goddess? The specific stories on these stones are lost, reduced to their foundational sounds. But that is precisely where their power lies. These rough carvings are not polished literature. They are the archaeological equivalent of a child's first, shaky letters, the monumental first step in a journey that would eventually give us the plays of Shakespeare, the laws of nations, and the very words you are hearing right now. Every time you write a note or read a sign, you are using the direct 4,000-year-old descendant of a Canaanite miner's brilliant solution to a practical problem, a solution etched in stone under the relentless desert sun. South of the pharaohs, beyond the cataracts of the Nile, a kingdom rose that would defy even Rome. The Kingdom of Kush, centered in what is now Sudan, was a powerhouse of the ancient world, a land of pyramid builders and iron smelters who conquered Egypt and ruled as its pharaohs for a century. To govern their empire and proclaim their own glory, they needed a voice distinct from their northern neighbors. So, around 300 years before Christ, they created the Meroitic script. This writing system is a fascinating duality appearing in two distinct forms. For monumental inscriptions on temple walls and royal stelae, they used a beautiful Meroitic hieroglyphic script with elegant pictorial signs that clearly borrowed the visual idea from Egypt. For the daily business of administration, letters, and economic records, they used a flowing, elegant cursive script written with a reed pen. Both forms used the same core system, an alphabet of 23 signs. And this is where the mystery crystallizes. We can read it, but we cannot understand it. Thanks to the influence of Egyptian culture, scholars long ago deciphered the phonetic values of the Meroitic signs. We know what sounds the letters make. We can sound out the words, pronounce the names of kings and queens, and follow the rhythm of the sentences. But the language those words represent is a locked room. Meroitic is linguistically isolated, unrelated to ancient Egyptian, and not conclusively linked to any known modern African language family. It is as if we had a complete recording of someone speaking, but the language they are using is one no one on Earth has spoken for over 1,500 years. The frustration is compounded by the nature of the texts that have survived. The corpus is limited and it is overwhelmingly formulaic. We have many royal inscriptions from temple walls proclaiming the deeds and titles of rulers. We have countless funerary texts from the hundreds of Kushite pyramids, short epitaphs that follow a strict pattern, listing the name of the deceased, their parentage, and a standard invocation to the gods. These are vital, but they are like hearing only the formal greetings and sign-offs from a vast correspondence. We lack the meat of the letters, the literature, the legal codes, the private diaries that would show the language in all its variety and reveal its grammar and vocabulary. Imagine trying to learn English if you only had gravestones that said, "Here lies John, beloved husband," and stone plaques that said, "I, Queen Elizabeth, built this temple." You would know names and a few nouns, but you would have no idea how verbs worked, no sense of narrative, no access to the thoughts that filled their days. Deciphering Meroitic would be nothing short of transformative. It would unlock the internal history of a major African empire from its own perspective. We have Roman and Greek accounts of Kush describing formidable archers and a powerful queen who negotiated with Augustus Caesar as an equal, but these are outsider views. To read a Meroitic account of that same negotiation, or a Kushite general's report on a battle, or a priest's description of their gods, would allow this civilization to tell its own story. We could finally understand their political structure beyond the king lists, their economic networks that stretched across Africa, and their unique blend of Egyptian, African, and indigenous traditions that created a culture so resilient it thrived for centuries after Rome's fall. The script is a clear, beautiful window into a lost world, but the glass is frosted, and the voices on the other side speak in a tongue we have yet to relearn. Across the vast, sun-bleached canvas of the Sahara, a script of angles and lines speaks from the stone. This is the ancient Libico-Berber script, the progenitor of the modern Tifinagh alphabet still used today by the Tuareg people to write their Berber language. There is a profound and haunting continuity here, a living thread connecting the present to a past that remains stubbornly silent. We can look at a modern Tifinagh word and understand it, and we can look at a 2,000-year-old rock carving and recognize many of the same geometric characters, circles with radiating lines, sharp crosses, and elegant dots. The alphabet itself has survived, a testament to the endurance of cultural identity. Yet the ancient messages carved alongside prehistoric rock art of giraffes and elephants, or near long dried-up river courses, guard their meaning with absolute secrecy. The script is familiar, but the language it records is an early, archaic form of Berber, a linguistic ancestor that has evolved so dramatically over the centuries that it is now largely unintelligible. It is as if you were handed a document in the alphabet you use every day, but written in the English of Beowulf, a tongue so old its grammar and vocabulary have shifted beyond easy recognition. The inscriptions themselves are logistical nightmares for researchers. They are not found on dated monuments or in layered city ruins, but scattered across the open desert, exposed on rock faces and canyon walls. Dating them is an exercise in informed guesswork, relying on stylistic analysis of the accompanying rock art, the patina of the carving, or, if one is extraordinarily lucky, an archaeological context like a nearby campsite. They could be 2,000 years old, or they might date back to the first millennium before Christ, a window into the Sahara when it was greener, a land of lakes and savannas crisscrossed by herds and the people who followed them. This is where the potential of these silent markings becomes breathtaking. Each one is a potential data point in a lost network. A cluster of symbols near a mountain pass might mark a territorial boundary for a nomadic clan. A series of inscriptions along a now invisible trail could be the mile markers of an ancient trans-Saharan trade route, a path for exchanging salt, gold, and ideas long before camels became the ships of the desert. A carving beside a depiction of a chariot, a technology introduced by contact with the Phoenicians or Romans, might record the name of a chief or a dedication to a forgotten god. Deciphering even a fraction of this corpus would do more than translate words. It would reconstruct a world. It would give voice to the indigenous Berber societies that interacted with Carthage, Rome, and later the Arab caliphates, not from the perspective of those empires but from their own. We could understand their social hierarchies, their legal customs, and their spiritual beliefs before the spread of Islam reshaped the region. These angular letters in the stone are the forgotten archives of the Sahara, waiting for the linguistic key that can turn a recognizable script into a readable history, allowing the desert itself to finally tell the story of its first people. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire managed a territory larger than Rome without a single sheet of parchment or carved stone tablet. Their records were not written but tied. The Quipu is a deceptively simple device, a collection of colored cords made from cotton or llama wool, from which dozens of secondary strings dangle. Each string is a cascade of complex knots, their type, position, and sequence forming a precise language of numbers. This was a three-dimensional database, a tactile and portable archive. The knots represented a base 10 positional system, with different knot types denoting ones, tens, hundreds, and so on. The colors of the cords held meaning: red for the army, yellow for gold, white for peace, creating a categorical system an administrator could read by touch as easily as by sight. With these knotted strings, the Inca bureaucracy conducted censuses, tracked warehouse stores across thousands of miles of mountain roads, and calculated tribute owed by millions of subjects. The Quipu was the nervous system of the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. But a haunting question lingers: could these strings hold more than numbers? A controversial and compelling theory suggests that some quipus, perhaps those used by historians and poets known as the amotas, might have encoded narrative, a knot-based literature recording history, laws, and epic poems. The concept hinges on the idea of a complex binary code, where the variables of cord color, spin direction, knot type, and even the type of fiber itself could combine to create a symbolic language far beyond accounting. A specific combination might not mean 500 llamas, but the king was born under the condor's gaze. If true, this would mean the Inca developed a unique, non-written form of information storage comparable to a computer's basic language, using physical yes or no, on or off variables to store complex data. The tragedy that followed is one of history's most devastating acts of cultural erasure. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they recognized the Quipu's power immediately, but saw it not as a rival technology, but as an idolatrous tool of the devil. In a systematic campaign, they gathered and burned countless quipus, destroying the primary records of an entire civilization. Even more catastrophically, they targeted the living keys to the system, the Quipucamayok, the trained readers and knot makers. These men were killed, displaced, or forcibly converted, their knowledge dying with them within a generation. The informational black hole this created is almost unimaginable. We are left with a handful of surviving quipus, perhaps only 600 in total, and no native manual to interpret their full logic. We can decode the numbers on some of them, but the colors and context that gave those numbers meaning are largely lost. The grand narratives, the poetry, the detailed histories of Inca kings and their conquests, all of it potentially vanished into smoke and silence. The Quipu stands as a profound reminder that writing is not the only way to think, and that some of humanity's most sophisticated ideas were woven not on pages but in strings, waiting for a touch that will never come again. Buried within an ancient West Virginia burial mound, a small sandstone disk ignited a firestorm that still smolders today. The Grave Creek stone is a palm-sized tablet discovered in 1838 during the excavation of a massive Adena culture mound. On its surface are 3 lines of deeply incised characters, a jumble of marks that seem to promise a key to the continent's deepest past. At first glance, the symbols are tantalizingly familiar. Some look like Greek letters, others resemble runic strokes or characters from the Phoenician alphabet. This visual cocktail of ancient scripts is precisely what made the stone so explosively controversial from the moment it was unearthed. Here, in the heart of North America, was what appeared to be an old world inscription, a piece of Libya or Iberia somehow transplanted to a prehistoric Native American grave. The decipherment attempts began immediately and have never truly stopped. Amateur epigraphers and passionate researchers have peered at those 3 lines and seen messages in Phoenician declaring this mound as a boundary marker for a Canaanite colony. Others have translated it as a Celtic dedication to the god Bel, or a Libyan funerary text left by ancient Mediterranean voyagers. Each new theory paints a dramatic picture of transoceanic contact, of ships crossing the Atlantic millennia before Columbus, their passengers leaving a cryptic gravestone in the Ohio River Valley. The emotional pull of this narrative is powerful, suggesting a pre-Columbian world far more interconnected than our textbooks allow. Yet, the academic consensus on the Grave Creek stone is a wall of resolute and near-unanimous skepticism. To most archaeologists and linguists, the stone is not a mystery from antiquity, but a classic example of a 19th century forgery. The evidence against it is circumstantial but compelling. The stone was found not by professional archaeologists who did not yet exist in the field, but by amateurs excavating the mound for curiosities. The man who owned the land and oversaw the dig, a local entrepreneur, had a direct financial interest in creating sensational finds to attract paying visitors to his site. More damningly, the inscription itself is the primary clue. The characters are a pastiche, a collection of symbols that look plausibly ancient but do not cohere into any single, authentic script. They are drawn from a grab bag of alphabets that would have been known to an educated American in the 1830s through popular books on antiquity. The inscription is also an isolated anomaly. No other artifact like it has ever been found in any Adena mound or anywhere else in prehistoric North America. It exists in a perfect vacuum, a single sentence with no linguistic relatives. This makes it the perfect case study in the enduring allure of what archaeologists call out-of-place artifacts. These are objects that seem to defy the established historical timeline, suggesting advanced technology, lost civilizations, or impossible voyages. They captivate us because they promise to rewrite history, to reveal a past that is more mysterious, more daring, and more romantic than the one we have carefully reconstructed from pottery shards and post holes. The Grave Creek stone speaks directly to that desire. It asks us to choose between a thrilling story of ancient global explorers and a more mundane, but perhaps more human, story of a local showman carving a relic to draw a crowd. In doing so, it holds up a mirror to our own relationship with the past. Do we want history to be a settled record, built patiently from evidence, or a grand mystery, always one tantalizing discovery away from being completely overturned? The stone itself offers no easy answer, sitting silently in a museum drawer, its 3 lines of characters forever hovering between a world-changing message and an elaborate, beautiful fraud. The desire to create a secret script is not confined to ancient hoaxes or lost cultures. In a Chicago printing house in the middle of the 20th century, a new alphabet was born from the machinery of modern revelation. The Urantia book, a dense spiritual tome first published in 1955, claims to be a series of papers transmitted by celestial beings, a comprehensive guide to God, the cosmos, and human destiny. Among its nearly 2,000 pages of philosophical discourse, readers encounter something startlingly concrete, detailed illustrations of an unknown alphabet. This is not a single scrawled line, but a fully presented system. The script appears in charts showing individual characters, their phonetic values described in English, and even sample words and sentences written in its elegant, flowing lines. The characters themselves are a beautiful fusion of curves and sharp angles, suggesting a cursive script meant for swift, graceful writing, yet possessing a structured, almost geometric consistency. It has all the hallmarks of a real language, with distinct vowels and consonants, and rules for how letters connect. Within the closed universe of the book, it is perfectly decipherable, a complete linguistic package. This internal completeness is the core of the modern riddle it presents. For believers in the Urantia book's divine origin, this alphabet is not a human invention at all. It is presented as a sample of the universal language, the script used by higher beings on advanced worlds, a glimpse into the divine linguistics of the cosmos. It is a sacred artifact delivered through revelation, its beauty and logic proof of its celestial source. The script's very existence within the book is seen as evidence of the text's authenticity, a complex system that mere humans could not have fabricated. The skeptical view, held by linguists and most outsiders, arrives at a completely different yet equally fascinating conclusion. They see the Urantia alphabet as a masterful example of a constructed language, or kunlang, a linguistic art project created with deliberate care. The timing is key. The book was compiled and written in the early to mid-20th century, a period that also saw the creation of elaborate fictional languages like J.R.R. Tolkien's Elvish scripts. The creators, whoever they were, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of phonetics and orthography. They designed a script that is aesthetically pleasing, internally logical, and functionally plausible, a testament to human creativity and intellectual play. In this light, the alphabet is a powerful piece of world-building, designed to lend an air of ancient authority and cosmic veracity to the philosophical teachings, a persuasive prop in a grand spiritual narrative. This is where the Urantia script stands apart from every other inscription on our list. It is not a relic waiting to be dug up, but a deliberately crafted puzzle delivered into the modern world with a built-in answer key and a passionate community that guards its meaning. The mystery is not one of decipherment. We can read it because the book tells us how. The mystery is one of origin. Are we looking at a human-made key to a self-contained mystery, a brilliant artistic creation meant to symbolize universal truth? Or is it, as thousands believe, a genuine specimen of something beyond our world, a linguistic Rosetta Stone handed down not from pharaohs but from angels? The script does not hide its meaning. It challenges us to decide where that meaning truly came from. Carved into the serene English countryside, a stone shepherd keeps a secret in plain sight. The Shugborough Shepherd's Monument, built in the mid-1700s on the grounds of an aristocratic estate, is a garden folly with a cryptic heart. Its central relief is a mirror image copy of a famous Baroque painting by Nicholas Poussin, titled The Shepherds of Arcadia. In that painting, shepherds gather around a tomb, pointing to an inscription that reads, "Et in Arcadia ego," meaning, "Even in Arcadia I am here," a poetic memento mori from death itself. But below this sculpted scene on the monument lies a sequence of letters that has obsessed codebreakers for over 2 centuries. The letters OUOSVAVV are carved with a noticeable gap between the O and the S, and they are framed by the letters D and M. This is not a weathered relic from antiquity, but an 18th century gentleman's puzzle, a deliberate cipher left by someone with a taste for mystery. The DM is the simplest part, a classic Roman abbreviation for dis manibus, meaning to the divine shades, a standard dedication on ancient tombs. It sets a funerary tone, but the 8 central letters are the true enigma. Theories about their meaning are a fascinating window into what we hope a secret code might contain. The most romantic suggests it is a concealed love letter from the monument's commissioner, Anson, to his deceased wife. Perhaps each letter is the first letter of a word in a poignant Latin or English phrase, a private tribute forever public. The most adventurous links it directly to Poussin's painting and the legend of the Holy Grail. Some researchers, connecting Poussin to alleged secrets of the Knights Templar, believe the code gives geographic coordinates or instructions to a hidden treasure, perhaps even the Grail itself, buried somewhere on the estate. The monument's prominent use of the Poussin scene, a painting already steeped in conspiracy lore, fuels this fire endlessly. Then there are the Masonic interpretations. The Anson family had connections to Freemasonry, and the sequence could be a Masonic cipher, where each letter corresponds to a number or a ritualistic concept known only to initiates. Others have proposed it is a simple substitution cipher for a biblical verse or a philosophical maxim. The puzzle's durability comes from its elegant simplicity. With only 8 characters, the number of possible solutions is vast, yet constrained enough to feel solvable. This has led to a torrent of proposed decryptions. One claims it stands for Optima Uxoris Optima Sororis Vidus Amantissimus Vovit Virtutibus, or best wife, best sister, a most devoted widower vows to your virtues. Another suggests it encodes the phrase, out of your own sweet veil, Alicia, vanishes vanity, referencing a potential lover. Yet none have achieved universal acceptance because without a key, any solution is just an educated guess that fits a preconceived narrative. The Shepherd's Monument is a modern sphinx, a riddle carved in stone not to guard a pharaoh's tomb but a private sentiment or a clever joke. It proves that the urge to inscribe a mystery is timeless, and that sometimes the most impenetrable codes are not those eroded by millennia, but those left in the manicured gardens of the very recent past, waiting for a key that may have been thrown away the day after the mason put down his chisel. These silent inscriptions resist us for reasons as varied as the scripts themselves, but a handful of obstacles appear again and again, forming a wall between us and the past. The most famous key was, of course, the Rosetta Stone, a slab that presented the same decree in 3 scripts, including known Greek. For most of our 35 mysteries, that golden ticket simply does not exist. There is no parallel text, no bilingual inscription where the unknown meets the known to provide a translation manual. Without it, decipherers are lost in a room with no doors, able to admire the wallpaper but unable to find a way out. Even when we have text, it is often maddeningly brief. The Indus Valley seals offer just 4 or 5 symbols, the proto-Sinatic inscriptions mere fragments. Trying to reconstruct a language from these snippets is like trying to learn a novel from a handful of random sentences torn from its pages. You might recognize a word or two, but the plot, the characters, the very soul of the story remain forever hidden. Then there is the language itself. We might recognize a script's symbols, but if the underlying tongue is completely unknown and unrelated to any living language, we have nothing to anchor our guesses. This is the curse of Moreutic. We can sound out the words, but they echo in a linguistic vacuum, their meanings absorbed by time. And we must always confront the most unsettling possibility of all, that some of these systems were never meant to record speech. They could be elaborate symbolic codes, mnemonic devices for rituals, or proprietary accounting marks, beautiful and structured, but fundamentally non-linguistic. The beautiful glyphs of Rongorongo or the recurring Vinca symbols might fall into this category, representing ideas directly, bypassing spoken language entirely. So how do modern researchers fight this silence? The tools have evolved from pure intuition to high-tech analysis. Computational linguistics allows us to process thousands of inscriptions at once, searching for statistical patterns in symbol frequency and placement that the human eye would miss. Massive databases compare unknown scripts to every known writing system, hunting for structural cousins. We can now model how languages evolve and change, testing if an unknown script could fit the profile of an ancient ancestor of a modern tongue. These methods are powerful, but they still require a foothold. The success story that proves the rule is Linear B. It was cracked because the underlying language turned out to be Greek, a known quantity. Once scholars hypothesized that connection, the script's syllabic structure could be tested against Greek vocabulary and grammar, and the pieces fell into place. Its older cousin, Linear A, uses the same script but encodes a completely unknown Minoan language. Without that linguistic anchor, all the computational power in the world cannot force it to confess its secrets. The difference between a solvable puzzle and a permanent enigma often comes down to a single, fortunate connection, a linguistic thread that leads us back from silence into the chorus of human speech. The true power of these silent stones and faded scripts is not in what they say, but in what they refuse to tell us. That refusal ignites something fundamental in the human spirit, a relentless drive to solve the puzzle, to crack the code, to hear the story. We are hardwired for this quest. It is the same impulse that draws us to detective novels, to cryptic crosswords, and to the intricate lore of modern video games. These ancient inscriptions are the ultimate cold cases, mysteries that have outlasted every detective assigned to them. Every failed attempt, every translation that collapses into nonsense is not a defeat. It is a lesson. Each new theory, however outlandish, forces us to look at the evidence from a different angle, to question our assumptions about how language works, how civilizations organized themselves, and how ideas traveled across mountains and seas. The process of trying to decipher teaches us more about the mechanics of human cognition than any single translation ever could. It reveals the incredible flexibility of the human mind to create systems of meaning, and the profound challenge of stepping into a thought process separated from us by millennia. We learn that language is not just a tool for communication, but a fingerprint of a culture's unique way of seeing the world. When we stare at the cascading glyphs of Rongorongo or the neat rows of Linear A, we are not just looking for words, we are trying to reconstruct an entire mental universe. The value of these 35 enigmas, then, lies far beyond a simple answer. It is rooted in the perpetual quest itself. This endless search keeps the wonder of the ancient world vibrantly alive. It is a humbling reminder that for all our satellites and supercomputers, there are still voices from the past that we have not yet learned to hear. These silent inscriptions are guardians of a profound truth, that history is not a closed book but an ongoing conversation, and we are still learning how to listen. From the remote jungles of Easter Island to the scorching mines of the Sinai Desert, these 35 inscriptions form a map of human curiosity itself. Each one, whether a polished Celt or a sprawling stela, represents a unique experiment in trapping thought outside the mind, a cry across the centuries that arrives as a beautiful, perfect silence. They are not dead ends or failures of history. They are open invitations, an invitation to look closer at the world around you, to question the stories we think are settled, and to marvel at the incredible diversity of the human need to say, "I was here, and this is what I knew." The next time you see a strange symbol or an old carving, let your mind wander down that path. Seek out the images of these scripts for yourself. Trace the lines of the Phaistos disc spiral or the angular grace of the Libico-Berber letters. Let yourself wonder what epic voyage, what prayer to a forgotten god, what record of a king's triumph might those lines contain. The conversation with the past is not over, it is simply waiting for more voices to join in. So we turn the question to you now, out of all these enigmas, which inscription captures your imagination the most? Is it the cosmic mystery of the Voynich Manuscript, the lonely plea of the Kensington runestone, or the knotted poetry of the Quipu? Share your thoughts and your own theories in the comments below. The greatest discoveries often begin with a simple conversation. And if you want to join us for more journeys into history's greatest puzzles, be sure to subscribe. The next mystery is always just waiting to be uncovered.